My clients, they were okay with the things that made them different. I think at first it can make you feel pretty lonely. You're really obsessed with X, Y, and Z, and everybody else is out going to parties, going on vacations, or doing things over the weekend, and they're spending time at home, or they're working on their business, or their peers are buying homes, and right now they're just putting all their money into their work. They're okay with that, and they're okay with doing what makes them come alive. And I think if you're doing what makes you feel alive, it's an endless source of energy.
I heard in an interview that you studied psychology and philosophy.
I did. That's true.
How did you go from that to executive coach?
That's a great question. I started out actually in pre-med and took a psychology course. I just fell in love with some of the aspects of psychology. Philosophy was something that I absolutely loved. And it felt like it was a real expansion on kind of perspective taking, thinking about the world in a different way, and really challenged me. And so a way of kind of fusing the two, I went into forensic psychology in grad school. My area of expertise was actually adult psychopathology and forensics. So I started in forensics prior to doing any executive work. I didn't even know the field really existed.
Is that like studying psychopaths? And
I did work at a level 5 supermax facility, doing work with those who were unable to be integrated into the general population. I did evaluations for mental state at the time of the offense. So like for the insanity defense, I did evaluations for competency to stand trial. So all of those kind of psychological aspects of things, but really the strong focus of a forensic program is on understanding personality and theory. And so that underpinning was really important. I went on to begin to academics a bit. It's where technology companies would reach out and say, hey, could you consult with us around products and doing things like that? And so I would do that from time to time. And then a venture firm reached out of nowhere, and I was consulting with a company on a product. And they said, hey, we have a founder that's really struggling, just got an infusion of capital, can't make decisions like they used to. You're really the only psychology person we know. Could you just speak with them? And so I did that. I absolutely felt like it was hand in glove. I was able to see the problems pretty immediately, able to move the needle very quickly. And I felt like this was an application of psychology that really had a very good use case that people could really benefit from on a large scale. So I hadn't heard about executive coaching in the past, but being able to, instead of going from kind of sickness to health, getting people who are incredibly healthy, functioning at a very high level, but just needed these little tweaks and little adjustments, seemed to be an area where I really thrived. And so I jumped into that full bore and made it my life.
I love it. So do you find that as a recurring pattern that if there is an infusion of capital or if they exit, does that muddy the waters of thinking? Or what are the recurring patterns? What's the trigger that they need you?
So there are a lot of reasons why people might engage me. And I think that it's really because when people are at a certain level of operation, they realize that skills are very easy for them to acquire, right? They've had to develop skills along their journey. And then when they start to bump up against kind of barriers they don't understand, they always try to figure it out first on their own. And when that isn't happening, when like maybe their company isn't scaling as well as they had hoped, or there's some kind of challenge in their organization with communication, struggles with their executives, things that are happening, they're preparing for kind of big moments, acquisitions, and things like that, it really becomes less about skills and more about themselves. And there are areas of themselves that maybe they're not seeing. And so much like you'd hire an engineer to come in and fix a coding issue, they bring someone in from the outside to help take a look at that situation, take a look at where they're at, and really help them find their way to the next level of operation. And when you're in these seats, a lot of times people, they may see what's happening, but they aren't in a position to tell you the truth. And so you need some kind of an objective third party, and they welcome the feedback. And it ends up being a really useful collaboration to not only identify the challenge areas, but really to get beyond them, so they can take their company where they want to go.
Is the challenge usually always personal?
The challenge is always internal. It usually is inside them, but oftentimes how it expresses themselves is very external. So for example, communication issues are really frequent and prevalent. So if somebody is like a scientist or a really technologically savvy person, they may have run through 20 scenarios in their head before they're talking to their team about a particular issue of a product or something like this. And they get to the conclusions very quickly. but their team hasn't been taken along on that journey. They haven't really been able to follow them on that path forward. And being able to say, look, sometimes if you're going to be addressing your executives, how about we take a step back and we take them along on this process? And you really pull back the curtain, include them in how you're thinking about it, take them on that process, and give them more of an insight into how you're thinking, so it's more clear and apparent to them, and they can begin to anticipate how you want things done, how you're thinking about the product. It gives them more of a wider scope of information. The problem is internal. They assume that other people are thinking like they are or getting to the same conclusions, and being able to work with them on that is really interesting. And I think it gives them better outcomes and results, and then they're all in.
How do you know with your demand now? I'm assuming that you get to choose your clients now, right? You always
Yeah.
probably have, but now at a even bigger level, what are some of the things that are like indicators, or is it just an intuitive thing that you're like, that's someone that I want to be that person for them that I could really bring to the next level?
I always do an intro call. I have a wait list. And then like when people get closer to onboarding, I do an intro call so we can connect and I can see if this person's really a good fit for me. I'm trying to do a few things in that call. One is that sometimes they have problems that I'm not the best person to solve. And so I want to take them to that person, or at least direct them elsewhere. For example, some people might want someone to work with their team, like as a group. I'm not a great group person. That's probably not going to be my area of expertise. It's a lot of dynamics going on there. And so I'm happy to off that to someone else. With individual work, I'm looking for someone who's all in, fully engaged, are clear on what their problem areas are for the most part. Somebody who is willing to put in the work and do the work, can commit to meeting weekly. And some of these things are really challenging for people with their schedule. Also, sometimes people believe that I am the source of all of the work, and they will have to do a lot of work on the back end to make the results happen. But I'm very fussy about who I take on, only because I see every client as my business card in the world, and their results are a reflection of me. And if they're not getting results, that's also a reflection of me. So I want to be sure that I have people who are willing to do the work, who are all in, who are engaged, and are most aligned with challenge areas that I know I can help them push ahead on. So that's what I'm looking for at kind of high level. If people are willing to do the work, that's really the best requirement that I have, and clear on kind of some of the issues that they're facing.
That's interesting, because how do you know if they're willing to do the work on a call?
I ask them about that commitment, and usually they're fairly clear on that, what I expect. And then honestly, as we go through this process, if they're not, I fire them. Like I get rid of, I get rid of clients. So I've only had to do that a couple of times in my career thus far, but I don't want somebody on board who isn't willing to be all in. And it's a commitment, but it's like any other business, right? Would you have a third party vendor who isn't fulfilling their end of the obligation? Absolutely not. And my standards are very high. People hire me because those standards are high. And so I'm not going to just float along for somebody who's unwilling to do the work, no matter who that person might be. And I open the door very, very graciously. I certainly say, it seems as though this time is not a time where you're able to commit to this process. I understand that it's intensive at times and it requires a lot of you. And maybe this is a busy season where this isn't the best fit for you. And I leave that door open, because if they're willing to come back and do that work, I want to have them. I just want to make sure that it's the right fit for both of us, because also they shouldn't be paying for something that isn't effective for them. And I can't be effective if they're not engaged.
Yeah, I understand it's quite an investment to work with you over the progression in
As
your
it should be.
Yes,
Thank
of
you.
course. Over the progression of your career, have you found that the more people pay, the more willing they are, or the more efficient the strategies are that you apply?
Not necessarily. I think that a lot of the people who hire me, my fee is not necessarily high for them. So I don't know if if that would be an effective correlation. I think it is earlier in your career. I think that you find that kind of when you are very early on and you're first starting out and you're trying to figure out exactly what your pricing strategies are and things, you get a lot of people who will come in the door at a lower price point. And then as you begin to raise that price point, it becomes a filter in and of itself, and people get a bit more serious about it. And then I think at the upper levels of pricing for what you do, you have people for which that price point is still not significant for them. And so I think you still run the range sometimes of individuals and their investments. But I find that most of the people who seek me out today, they are incredibly invested. So I haven't had, as I said, I've only had 2 clients that I've really had to say, look, this investment isn't really lining up. And that's in 15 years or so. People are pretty committed when they are willing to pay for a service like this. And I think that oftentimes my referrals come from friends who have used me in the past. And so I think that they're very engaged, utilizing the thing that they've watched help their friends and understanding that their friends have put in the work. And usually they talk about that experience and what they've undergone. So I do feel when you have referrals, you almost end up with a caliber of client that is very similar to the last that worked very hard. They tend to be similar people. So I felt very fortunate in that way.
I
Yeah.
read one of your Substack newsletters. It's a newsletter. They
It's a
officially
newsletter. Yes, the ultra successful newsletter on Substack.
You should definitely subscribe if you're listening. But I read one of them and it was about leverage. How a lot of your clients, one of their greatest leverage points is they accept who they are, they accept their strength, their weaknesses, if I understood it correctly, and they know how to leverage them in the environment to leverage them. And I think also probably timing has something to do with that too, knowing when to activate some things. But what if someone is just at the beginning of their journey and they may not understand what to leverage? What would you advise them to do?
That's a really great question. I think that the thing about who you are as you move through the world, and I think everyone kind of experiences this to some extent, is you start to see where you're different from others and where you're the same. And sometimes you try to make yourself more similar in some ways to fit in the flow of what's happening. And in other ways, you notice that you're just very different. Maybe your focus is a little different. Maybe the things you want are different. The things that matter to you are a little different. Your personality and the things you're really niche interested in are a little different. And I think that my clients, one of the things, pattern that I see from very early on is they were okay with the things that made them different. And they didn't try to force those things into the rest of the way society operates. And I think at first it can make you feel pretty lonely. You're really interested in this little mechanical tool, or you're really obsessed with X, Y, and Z. And everybody else is out doing these other things, or going to parties, and maybe they're like dating girls or boys or what have you. And they're okay to be different. And then even as they're coming up, maybe their peers are going on vacations or doing things over the weekend, and they're spending time at home, or they're working on their business, or their peers are buying homes. And right now they're just putting all their money into their work. There are points of difference that are going to happen along that journey, but really they contribute to being your greatest points of leverage and why you win in the end. And I think they're okay with that. And they're okay with doing what makes them come alive, both at work and personally. And I think that's also where we dig into, if you're doing what makes you feel alive, it's an endless source of energy. And so for them, it keeps them engaged in the long haul. When you're just doing a job to get by and every day you have to push yourself to get out of bed, that's a really hard way to live over decades of your life. And so I do think that it's a differentiator in that way as well.
I see so many, even semi-successful business owners that make a couple $1,000,000 a year, they get stuck in what I'd call like a business that they hate, or a business of it. I see this so much. It's actually like mind-boggling, or like a business where their points of leverage from an outsider is so clear that they're not leveraging. If they're charismatic and they love to teach, they're in a business where none of that can be leveraged.
Yeah.
And how important is it to find something, an obsession, and focus on something where your leverage can be applied? Because I see this fail a lot. Like, people don't make the connect.
You're so right. And I think that happens all the time. They think they're starting a business and they end up giving themselves a job that they really hate. And I think as people rise, the thing that you find that doesn't happen, that gets them trapped in this, is that they haven't determined yet what their highest and best use is in this business. When you're doing all of these things that you don't like, it's not only bad for you, it's bad for the business, because you're not going to be optimal at those things. If you're doing marketing, but you hate marketing, and you put that against somebody who absolutely loves it, they're always thinking about it, they're trying new ads, you can't compete with that. And so why not give that piece that you don't like to somebody who loves it, who's going to shine in it, and who's going to really push the business ahead? The thing that you will be highest leverage in and your highest and best use is where you want to sit all the time as a business owner. And that's going to be different for every person. Like, one person might be an amazing networker, and so he's forming partnerships and collaborations and doing all these wonderful things. Another person just might be a phenomenal strategist and introverted and stays behind the scenes, but like loves that work. And so whatever your point of highest leverage is, you look at what are those things, and then everything else you try to give away. Or you find a third party, or you find somebody else to be doing it. Because if you're mired in that stuff, you're going to hate your life. Your business is going to be held back. And it's going to be not what you've dreamed of as far as, you may make a good income, but your life isn't what you hope. So I think you make a fantastic point. And I see that also. You're making a couple $1,000,000, so it feels great, but you don't realize you are holding yourself back and keeping yourself small and also making your life a lot harder than it needs to be. So wonderful call out on your part.
Kind of related to that work-life balance, what's your take on that? And do your clients strive after that?
I think my clients have a hard time with that. But I do think my take on it personally is that throughout your life, your work will probably have, I call them like waves of intensity. You're going to have periods throughout your career. It doesn't end when you're young, but throughout your career, you may have times where you have this big project or you want to ramp up a new element of your business, or you have to learn some new things where you're going to pull some really heavy hour weeks. And that's okay, but you can't do that in perpetuity. That can't be your life. So I do think that my take on it is work and life has to integrate, especially if you run a business or you're somebody who has a career or an executive job that is very demanding. But you just have to find ways to integrate balance that are easy for you. And I think it has to be easy. Like for myself, I have a gym in my home. I live on a farm right now, so I can go outside and spend some time in nature. But you have to find whatever is easy for you and make it something that isn't, if it has a high friction point, you're not going to do it. So if you're working long hours, you're not going to say at the end of your workday when you're exhausted and it's 8 p.m., oh, now I'm going to pack up and go to the gym. Like that's probably not going to happen, but you could do it in the morning, go to the gym and then start your day might be a little bit easier. Or you may decide, hey, I'm going to go to this trail where I can run in the afternoons and block out a time every day. Whatever it is, you've got to find a way to integrate your life around work because technology has made our work pretty immersive. But if you don't have that cutoff, you're going to burn out pretty quickly. I'm usually telling clients, please take some time off. It's very challenging for them.
I think part of that too is self-awareness of knowing when you're getting diminishing returns.
Yeah,
Or,
good point.
where it could be detrimental, where it's okay, I need to step it back because I could actually be a liability at this point. I
Yeah.
think that has something to do with it, hopefully.
I agree. I think self-awareness is really important on a number of areas, especially around burnout. The first sign of burnout is usually like an attitude shift, right? That's the first thing that was people start getting more cynical. They're not like that comes even before engagement. With employees, you'll see it because they'll start doing things like turning off their cameras. They aren't responding as much on Slack. They're like, you start seeing those things. But before that even happens, there's usually a mood shift. There's an attitude shift, but you can't really see those in others, but hopefully you can see it in yourself. So when you start like dreading some elements of your work or really starting to feel like you have to push yourself, take that as a flag to take a step back and integrate some other things in your life.
One of the things I see that holds people back from starting a business, or they're in a business, but they're afraid to take a risk, make a change, do something bigger, and they've been plateaued for a while, is a lack of self-trust. You had a Substack where you said it's not necessarily that when they take these big risks or chances that they think it's going to work. It's just that if it fails, they feel resourceful enough to say, okay, I'll figure it out. And that self-trust is missing in so many people. So what are some practical things that someone could do to build self-trust in tiny things?
I think that the way in which you can start to look at self-trust, there's a couple of different things that you can do, and you can do it as well as in self-belief. I think these things go very like hand in hand. An exercise anyone can do is really to think back on a time when you've really had to overcome something. I don't know if, I mean, everybody in life, I think, has had to overcome something significant to move forward. And maybe that's, it could be as dramatic as had to overcome cancer, maybe divorce, maybe it was something at work. There was something that failed, a system that failed, or something that happened. How did you overcome that? What tools did you use? Who were you? What kind of traits did you have? How did you get through that? And remind yourself that throughout your life, you have probably always been able to figure it out. You have probably always found a way, and you probably have much more resilience in you that you have utilized at various points in the past that you don't really give yourself credit for, because all you see now are the possible anxieties, the noise, the problems that could occur. But the truth of it is, who you are is able to take and tolerate and manage a lot more than you probably think in this moment. And so one thing that I would ask people to do is first, just to remind yourself who you are and what you can do and what you contain. But secondly, start taking risks that prove that out, and small ones, low stakes risks. Like maybe you've been thinking about this collaboration with a colleague who's intimidating, but it's a great idea that you have. Have the conversation. They say no, no big deal. Try something outside of work entirely. Don't tell anyone and run a 5K and start doing it for yourself. Prove yourself out. Start to really find a way to dig into who you are and be proving that out over and over again. And as you begin to win on the small things, they begin to stack and give you more and more kind of confidence and self-belief to try something else. And so those are really how you begin to multiply that. But I think it starts with grounding yourself in really who you are and not forgetting that, because it's really easy as the days go by and it's busy and we have all this social media stuff and people can feel very insecure. But like in your own life, you've probably done a lot. And to give yourself really credit for that and recognize who you've had to be to get where you've been.
You mentioned physical activity quite often. I take it you conducted research that really shows a high return on investment on that.
I do. I think that if you can do it and it's something that you're able-bodied and able to exercise, we do see that it reduces stress, which is a big factor with people who are very type A and very driven. You need to have I call them a release valve. You need something that's going to siphon that off a little bit.
You need a boxing class to get
Yeah, I think that whatever you can do that's physical is fantastic if you're able to. I think also what I've seen is I've seen a lot of people have genuine health problems who haven't done those things. And that's the story that we never talk about, right? Like the 30-something-year-old person who has a heart attack because they're pulling 15-hour days every day and never leave the computer. We don't talk about all of these other kind of health and physical problems that people can develop. So I'm really astutely aware of that, but I'm also like, I know that it's great for stress. It's really great for creativity and thinking to get outside. It's really important for just being a nice person. I think a lot of times when we're stressed out, we take those things out on our families and other people. So it helps to balance us out and create those barriers from like kind of work to personal life, helps us to transition. So yeah, I do find it useful in a number of different ways if you're able to do it.
I just had a client that grew a lot in a year. That actually ended up costing her marriage. How do you advise people navigate that, especially if they're the person in the growth seat?
I think number one, if you are in the place where you have not yet engaged in a committed relationship, making sure that the person that you choose is on board with really who you are, being upfront about it. I think a lot of times when people are dating, they want to be gracious to the other person. And so sometimes they tone down what the level of their ambition is or who they are. And that's a mistake if you are engaging early on. But once you're already with someone, we know marriage is like the biggest financial decision you're going to make and certainly the biggest personal one you're going to make. But once you're already engaged, I think that expressing to that person, genuinely having the conversation, hey, this is really important to me. This is something I'm excited to do. This is something I hope I have your support on. And somebody who denies you that support and can't get on board with being your cheerleader or being the person who can stand beside you while you do something that's really meaningful and important to you. And you can make some compromises, right? In that, for example, maybe you make every Friday, we're going to have date night, right? Or what's your concerns? Because you want to hear their concerns too. Their concerns may be you're going to lose touch with the family. Maybe I'm not going to be as important to you anymore. Maybe you're going to meet somebody else because maybe you won't see me as being as successful as other people you're going to get to know. Whatever those insecurities are, I think it's really important to hear those and address those. But if somebody's just resistant, no, you must be this smaller person, I think you have a really big decision to make, right? I mean, will you remain small for the sake of this other individual? And you have to ask yourself, is that love what love means to you? And is that what you want for the next decade, 2, 3 of your life? And those are hard conversations, but I think you have to be first in picking your spouse, being very deliberate. Once you're in that relationship, communicating very thoroughly about what you want and being on board. If they have insecurities or challenges, hearing those out, trying to address those and being open to it, not just saying, oh, it's my way and I don't have to listen to you. And then if they aren't willing to be a part of this vision you have moving forward, really making some hard calls about that. But most of the time, I would assume that somebody is excited about what you do because it's like, hey, if you're winning, we're winning, right? Like you should be a team. But sometimes that's hard for people in adjusting to the kind of changing circumstances and income.
Do you also find that sometimes between between business partners as maybe someone wants to grow faster than
Oh,
the
that
initial
was a question
partner?
we got from Twitter. It was actually repeated 3 times. Like, how do you decide a co-founder? How do you actually go apart from a toxic co-founder?
Yeah, a co-founder is like a marriage, and you're going to spend a lot of time with that person. It is
Maybe more than your marriage.
yes, oftentimes it is more than your actual marriage. So you want to be sure that you're compatible, and people don't spend the time to really vet that person thoroughly. I think that when co-founders, when they split, they break companies, they have the capacity to influence the organization. I think being really upfront early on, it's a great split when people say, all right, I'm going to be the CTO, and you're going to be the CEO, right? Your jobs, your ranges of responsibility, it's pretty clear. Around kind of vision, you have to have a shared vision. And my hope is that shared vision starts really early and that you are lockstep on that vision as much as possible. You may change on like strategy and how quickly you get there, but the vision itself should be shared. And selecting that co-founder should be a process that takes a lot of time. It shouldn't be anything rushed into, oh, I met you on Angel List. You seem great. You have a great background. Let's be co-founders. You'd be surprised how often things like that
Wow.
really happen. Or like an investor will recommend a co-founder, right? You're already starting a company, you're venture backed, and someone says, oh, I know this person. Now you have somebody who's very influential recommending someone. Feels like a lot of pressure that you feel like maybe they would know what's best for the company. Sometimes those personalities get along and sometimes they don't. And so things like this happen all the time. But I think that the other thing that makes it really important in a company is that they have a lot of equity. So when they leave, sometimes a lot of equity goes with them. And then they end up in equity in a company that they're not part of anymore. And they're going to succeed from your building. It would make me incredibly resentful, probably, but it is things that have to move forward. So you do want to be really cautious about who you choose, much like a marriage partner. You want to vet that person out. You want to spend a lot of time with them, and you want to really be cautious in that decision.
With these top performers that you coach, if you could guess what some of the regrets looking back are, what do you think they would say if they had any?
Regrets. It's hard for me to say only because of the people that I work with. They're always the stories that like have worked out. So when you look at regrets in the past, they're never regretting like, oh, I wish I wouldn't have put X amount of money in. They would say, oh, I should have put more in. I should have gone in harder. So when I give that kind of advice on a podcast type situation, I always remember that there is a swath of people for which they will have very different regrets because maybe things did not work out. Maybe they lost a significant amount of money. So I try to keep that in mind. I think some of the regrets might be around spending time with family and their children because they do have to miss sometimes significant amounts of events or things. And it's very immersive. I think sometimes the impact of that are things that they don't realize. You think that you're putting in a work day and providing, and at the same time, others may experience that as being absent in their life. So I think maybe more engagement with their kids may be one thing that you might hear. I don't know if that's necessarily true for all. I think going heavier in their business earlier probably would have been a regret some had, because finally when they realize like they have that rock solid confidence in what they're doing, they feel like maybe they could have gotten ahead further faster. I think taking some risks that they end up taking later, they probably would have made earlier. But I think that the regrets that they have are not many on that front. And a lot of the clients I have, for what it's worth, tend to have relationships that do pretty well. And I often wonder if it's because the type of person who would seek out a coach may be more in tune already with listening to others, receiving feedback, and more attentive in different ways.
They probably have a higher sense of self-awareness too, of what
Perhaps.
they may need and that they don't know, something that they need to know.
Yeah, for the majority that I'm working with, it seems like they've had their partner for the duration. I think that would be really hard. I have a couple of people who are dating at this point, and man, it would be very challenging. It is very challenging for people to find a partner who understands the demands that you have.
It's more quality time than a lot of time, especially if they're still in building phase. So let's go more towards your story of when did you start sharing content on social media, especially Twitter? When did you start the Substack? And when did you realize you loved it and that you were helping people to do more of it, if you love it?
I do love it. I've been doing it for 10 years. I've been on Twitter
Wow,
for, I think, a
really?
decade. Yes. So I am not an overnight Twitter story by any means. I've been on that platform forever and I've loved Twitter. So I genuinely do the platform. And that's why with all of the ups and downs of leadership, I'm probably there to stay. I don't see myself going anywhere just because I love the format. I like the community. I like how people interact with each other.
You create great content.
Thank you so much. But I do feel like, early on, I very much didn't share the kinds of content I share today. And I think that it is because I felt like it was very bad to put yourself up front. I do good work. I stay behind the scenes. I'm nerdy and researchy. People still found me and I still did a good business. And then I realized, I think that, moving into sharing more on Twitter, you really do start to see this kind of magnification effect that people are able to use that feedback. They have good results with that feedback. They're using the things that you post. You get these great emails or DMs around, oh, I tried this thing out at work. It worked really well. Thank you so much. And it really gives you this motivation to share. And with the Substack, one of the things that I recognized is that people are always interested in, if you work with athletes or you work with executives and others, like people are interested in how these people position themselves and what makes them great. And so I thought, I'm going to pull some of the learnings that I have. I have notes from decades worth of work, or over a decade worth of work. And I'll pull out some of the lessons that I've really learned from this and put it in a newsletter that comes every week and share some of those things with ways people can apply it. Because I recognize not everyone's going to be a client only because I'm one person. And this is a way of kind of democratizing that information, making it available to absolutely anyone and making it really reasonable for people to take those lessons, apply them to their work and have really good outcomes, or at least challenge themselves. Every week, along with that lesson, as there's a personal challenge and you can opt to take that challenge if it's an area that you struggle with. And if you don't, then maybe don't take that challenge, but it gives you a way of actually pushing yourself if you don't have a coach or you're working with anyone else. I've been on Twitter for a long time. Probably the past 3 years people have been, it seems, more online since the pandemic began. And I think that was really an accelerator for my presence on that platform, probably for a lot of people.
Yeah, I just found you recently. I don't spend much time on Twitter, but here and there, I'll actually go more to listen to Twitter rooms, the audio
Oh,
rooms.
nice.
But I was just scrolling and I saw, a post and I was like, that's good. But I kept seeing like your post and I'm like, this is deeper than just the superficial personal development content out there. And I started following you. And then the second thing I started saying was like everyone sharing little quotes from your Substack. That's how I found out about it. And when people share your content like that, I'm like, okay, so this is like, where's the Substack? And then I subscribed. It's the best $10. And I think what you're doing is so important. What would you say to more academics and researchers? Should they share more? I think people need it. I don't think they realize how much people need their help sometimes.
I think if you're doing the work out in the field and you have something that can really benefit others, just provide it for free. And I think one of the things I did for a long time is I just gave it away for free. And then you really build an audience. And when you give away value and you work at being intentional to help other people, eventually people want to be a part of that. I have a subreddit, for example. In the first week we opened that subreddit, it was
Now
in
I
the
have
top
to
10.
go join the sub.
It was in the top 10% of subreddits in the first week, right? Because it's community. Community is everything. People want to help each other. And I encourage people, like I have one rule on the subreddit, and that's don't be a jerk. Everything else, absolutely fine, right? But be good to each other. And you have people who are just starting out in their careers asking questions. And then you have somebody who's been in like private equity for 20 years giving that person advice. Like, so fantastic to be able to have that kind of resource. And sometimes it's active and sometimes it's not. But they've had get-togethers that I haven't been a part of. They have a book club I'm not a part of. But I love the fact that like a community can then begin to reinforce itself, and you create this, you want to be this great force in the world for good things to happen and people to like cheer each other on and to really reach the heights that they want to. And not everybody has, as you've talked about your client, not everyone has that support at home. So this is a place where I want people to feel like, hey, cheer each other on, be excited about what people are doing, like root for each other and have great intentions. Don't be a jerk out there, and like really help each other win. If I can be a part of that in the publication that I have and giving people tools, if I can cheer them on online, I try to be a positive presence there. If I can help to facilitate a community that kind of cheers each other on, then I feel like that's the kind of impact that's really meaningful for me. And I think that for academics or others who are out there, giving things away for free to show people where the value is brings people in. It's like Andrew Huberman is a great example of somebody who, very academic, provides a lot of value. and then gives that away for free, and then uses that to really build a community. And then you can go from there. If you want to offer something that's paid, or you want to provide a product, or you want to get it really refined and offer something that's going to be very specific, you can do that. But everybody can join into the free content and get something from it. And I think that's a really high value use of your time.
What are some things other than writing and coaching that you do daily that energize you so that you could be your best coach, perform best for your clients?
I think that, and I don't want to say exercise again, because I think I have mentioned it a few times, but I do work out on a daily basis. I take one day off, usually a week. I do spend time we have animals here on the farm. And I think that, to be honest, it's hard to be super serious if you have a chicken that has jumped on your back or that kind of stuff. You just can't take yourself too seriously. We have horses here at the property, so I'll go and visit with them. I try to pull myself out of my own head and give myself an opportunity to unwind and relax and be outside a bit. So I think that for me, I find that very energizing, spending time with my pets and things like that. So animals are a big deal for me. And I've grew up on a farm.
I heard your dog. What type of dog do you have?
I have a rescue. She's some kind of, do you? I have a beagle mix. She was found on the streets of Philadelphia. She was 6 years old when they found her. And so we went into a shelter, and I always said, I lived in Philadelphia for a while. And I said, if I ever adopt a dog, I'm going to come back to Philly and get a rescue from there, because they have some really rough conditions for animals in some of those places. So I went and got a former street dog. And since we have a decent sized property, I figure it's a great place for her to heal and relax and to get back to her normal self. It's taken her a couple years to settle in, but she's doing great, and I'm really happy to have her.
No wonder she's always on Zoom, because she's a rescue. They're needy. They love to be by you.
Yeah. They are. What kind of dog do you have?
So he's a mix of a blue heeler and a pit bull, but I actually got him. I never go on Facebook except for Facebook Marketplace. And that day, this pregnant woman was like, I'm going to leave him on the street because he's just too much. And I have a 2-year-old, and it was just a timing thing. But I have an Australian Shepherd too, and just the rescue, they need more love, attention, energy, and they like to be by you a lot more physically. It's funny.
Yes, she definitely follows me wherever I go. So next time I'll have to take off her tag so you can't hear her shaking in the background.
Oh no, I love it. And last question, I'm actually curious, what process did you take by choosing that farm? Did you have something in mind already, or how many properties did you see? What were you looking for?
So I grew up on a farm, and I was actually we were looking at properties in New York City when the pandemic hit. So I thought that I would be living in New York and buying our first property.
Yeah, that's very different than a farm.
It really is. And you'll see I had posted a picture. We were out in this deck, looking over Manhattan in one of those places. And then everything shut down, and it became where I didn't need to be in the city anymore. My home base was in New York City. I would see clients in New York. I would go to their offices. And after the pandemic, it wasn't necessary for me to stay there. And so I thought the farm was always the goal, but I knew that I would have to spend some time in the city before I could actually get to that goal. I needed to really build up my career, and I thought it would be more of a retirement kind of plan. But after that, and more people are online, I have a lot of global clients and who have always been fine with being virtual. And it just really opened up my whole business to being able to be that way and operate that way. So we looked for a place that was commutable into New York. So this is commutable into New York, but it is still such a distance that I probably wouldn't want to do it on a regular basis. And I wanted it to be, I had a few other criteria, right? You have to be close to a medical facility. I don't want to have to be 3 hours from a hospital or something. I wanted to be able to have some luxuries. So being able to get groceries delivered, or being able to have some takeout available. I wanted it to be able to be large enough to host family and be able to be that kind of new home base for family. I wanted it to have protected land around it, so I wouldn't have to worry about developments, its own water supply, just various things that were really important to me. And it took a while to find, but we had a really good real estate agent who was like a barracuda out there, and you find people who are really good at what they do, and she was fantastic. She was hooked into kind of the farm and Amish community, could really find a lot of properties. She was very well trusted. So even in an environment that was very competitive at the time, she was able to get the win for us. And we've been very grateful.
I love it. It's actually the first Twitter post I ever saw of yours was you shared a picture of a horse and called it a unicorn or something. Like it looks like a unicorn. It was a white horse. And so it's fascinating. I think that people underestimate that picture had nothing to do with what you do, but it got my attention and then I started following you. What's next for you in the next couple of years and where can people find out more about you?
What's next for me? I want to continue to do individual work only because it is what energizes me and what I do. I have to stay engaged there. I will be expanding in the newsletter forums. The ultra successful newsletter on Substack is a great place to connect with the material. If they want to see me directly or talk to me directly, it's at Dr. Gurner on Twitter. You are a bit of a LinkedIn legend. I didn't realize like how much of a legend you are in that space. It is not a space that I know all that well. And so when I was like, you were like, oh, let's have an interview and kind of connect. I had mentioned it to somebody that everyone knows who you are. It was a really cool, it was like I was speaking with a celebrity. So I came in here very humbled today to speak with you, and
A
I'm very
Twitter
excited to
legend now.
talk to. I think that I have a ways to go to be on Twitter where you are on LinkedIn, and I'm excited to get there one day. So maybe I'll ask you for tips as we move
Yeah.
forward.